G'day ladies and gents, welcome to War Thunder with Mags. Now, I had an interesting question earlier on in the week. Player asking me, is the vampire really as bad as people say? In a word, yes. But don't take my word for it, let me show you. Now, I'm going to run this battle completely unedited from start to finish, and this was a pretty good battle by the vampire's standards. Now, first thing I want you to watch here is this takeoff. Now, we've all done takeoffs before. This is the Korean map. It has a very long runway. It's designed to launch Sabres, Panthers, F-80Cs. I'm at 100% throttle. I've used up 2/3 of the runway already, and I've only just hit 200 kilometers an hour. I am just about to run out of runway, and I'm drifting off to the left. I have just enough lift to get off the ground, and I'm doing 240 kilometers an hour. The second I wheels up, my acceleration dies. I was accelerating faster on the ground with the drag of the wheels than it was when I've actually pulled them up and leveled out. I am in the middle of a turn at the moment. When I level out, as you can see, the acceleration comes up a little bit, but not a whole lot. Now, the second thing about this aircraft, you'll notice this entire match I'm low to the ground. That's because the optimal altitude for the Vampire is sea level. The second you try and get over about 4,000 to 5,000 feet, your already lackluster performance dies. Now, this aircraft is underperforming what it was historically capable of doing, but not by as much as people think. I'm going to run you some numbers. Now, the variant of the Vampire we have in game is the FB.5. Now, keep in mind that the FB.5 has exactly the same battle rating as the F-80C. Now, the FB.5 is powered by a Goblin 2, which is I can see if I can pronounce this correctly, a centrifugal flow jet turbine. It's an older style. It's a similar design to basically what the Germans' early war original development jet engines were. They were not particularly great, nor were they particularly efficient. And the Goblin 2 puts out about 2,100 foot-pound of thrust. It wasn't a powerful engine. The F-80C that the Vampire in-game is tiered against is powered by a J33A35 axial flow, a later design on the jet engine, with 5,400 pounds of thrust. Yeah, same battle ranking, yet the F-80C has over twice the power output of the Vampire. And keep in mind, this Vampire is stock, which means it's not fully upgraded. It doesn't have all the final engine mods, it has absolutely nothing, which means its power, its current thrust levels are actually less than 2,100, and that's where you've got to start grinding this thing. Below 3,000 feet, the maximum climb angle you can maintain without losing speed is 6 degrees. Once you're above 3,000 feet, it's about 4 degrees. Now, this is a lot better. There was recently a patch that fixed up the climb rate on the Vampire. It used to be you couldn't climb above 3 degrees at any time without losing speed. You'll notice I've been flying relatively flatly with very little climb this whole match. I'm still only doing 520 kilometers an hour. Prop fighters would be doing 600 by now. Would have been doing 600 when they were not long off the runway. I'm still trying to wind up. The whole aircraft will only top out in level flight at about 600 kilometers an hour to 650 max. It can go faster, but it has to dive. But to dive, it needs to get altitude, which it's incapable of getting. Now, the Vampire's design with the twin boom was actually related directly around the style of engine it had. In the originally early model jet engines, the more exhaust tail the aircraft had, the more thrust it actually lost in flight. Now, this was very important with early jet engines, especially things like the Goblin 2, which had a very limited amount of thrust to begin with. Running the twin boom allowed the fuselage to be shorter, thus less thrust was lost, keeping performance higher. It also had an interesting side effect. The full metal elevator in the rear actually sat in part of the thrust stream at the back of the aircraft, and what actually they inadvertently ended up doing was creating a very, very, very primitive form of vectored thrust in the rear of the Vampire. It was incredibly maneuverable in the vertical. It could turn and roll, its maneuverability was great. It didn't have a great amount of performance. Unfortunately, the version in the game has even less than that. Why the maneuverability of the aircraft has definitely been modelled correctly, and it is incredibly maneuverable. Any form of sustained manoeuvring longer than about 10 seconds will drop you below 200 kilometers an hour down towards around 120 kilometers an hour, and the aircraft will start to stall. Because you won't be doing these maneuvers from a high altitude, you're likely just to crash into the deck. Now, this is a MiG-15 battle, so I'm circling the back. One advantage that the Vampire does have in game at the moment is it can carry a metric crap ton of fuel. It can stay up for almost an hour. Actually, I think it can stay up for over an hour. So it's able to, if you can get it to circle around the back and lurk at the back behind the enemy's base, you can keep it there indefinitely. Eventually they're going to have to come back and refuel and reload, and as much as I don't normally like vulturing on the runways, if you're flying a Vampire, it's the only way you're going to ever kill a MiG-15, unless you get lucky in a head-on. So that's a tactic I'm trying to exploit here. Now, unfortunately, looking at the current release tree, things don't get too much better for the Vampire. The two models that are listed after this one to be released onto the tree, and I originally thought there was 3, is the FB.5 and the FB.5. Now, the FB.5 and the FB.5 variants were both powered by the Goblin 3, so that's what's going to be in the remaining aircraft to be added to the game. But these engines only produce 3,350 pounds of thrust. Now, if the Vampire, the current Vampire, the FB.5, is lined up against the F80 in its current battle rating, when these two are introduced, these have to be based against the F9F and the Sabre for equivalent battle ratings. Yet they're going to be, well, at 3,350, the FB9 that gets placed against, well, should be placed against the Sabre, logically, is going to have half the thrust of the Sabre and the MiG-15 that is going to be fighting against. As you can see here, one of the things that happens when you're flying a Vampire, the second the enemy sees you, they try and take you out, because you're an easy kill. There's not much they can do about it. The only reason I'm able to survive that is by putting an early burst on at the MiG-15, forcing it to try a head-on, and making it turn away to try and save itself. I have no risk if I lose this aircraft. He's got far more to lose than me, and he's going to make another pass, so I do exactly the same thing again. And this is all you can do to defend yourself. As you can see, I'm in manoeuvres here, and my airspeed has dropped through the floor. I'm already starting to suffer the first effects of stalling. Now, there was another variant of the Vampire that was built by the Australians, and it was built during the time of the Korean War, and it fits the time frame given in the game. However, it is not on the release tree, and that's the F30. Now, it's a real shame that that one isn't in, because that's the Vampire that everybody remembers. That's the one that had made the Vampire famous and made it fairly well known in aircraft groups. It wasn't powered by a Goblin engine. It was powered by a Rolls-Royce Nene. Now, you'll know the Nene is the engine the Soviets ripped off and turned into the Kilmov VK1, which they used to power the MiG-15, at 5,000 pounds of thrust and wartime emergency power available. These things were nasty once they got these engines on board. And this here is about the only truly easy way to get kills, actual air kills, in a Vampire hunt bots. Now, the F30 variant, there were 80 built, they were all in the time frame. They were basically the same aircraft as the one in game. They had a few structural adjustments. The current variant, the FB.5, was a mixed aluminium and wood constructed aircraft. The F30 variant that was built by the Australians had some of the wood removed. There was still some there, but it had extra aluminium put in to handle the sheer power of the Nene that was bolted into it. The Nene on the, as I said before, that was bolted into it was also adjusted to have military power or wartime emergency power, WEP, available to it. For limited usage, it did cause heat problems. However, the armaments and fuel loads were exactly the same. Now, I'm sure I did see this on the release tree at one stage in time, but a quick check today shows if it was ever there, it no longer is, which is a real shame, because with the British F8 Meteor being such a subpar aircraft in having to fight Sabres and MiG-15s, the F30 Sabre with the Rolls-Royce Need engine would have been a serious competitor at top levels. It would never have been as fast as either the Sabre or the MiG-15, but it has some serious manoeuvring capabilities and is able to carry a lot of ammunition and a lot of firepower up. So now with the 2 AI out, the MiG-9 is one of the last aircraft left in the game. My team has done a beautiful job gutting the MiG-15s down. I'm strafed out of ammunition, strafed out as many ground targets as I can. I took a hit in there somewhere that is making me bleed a little bit of fuel, and now I'm running home, and the match ends in the next couple of minutes just before I get to land. So that is one of the best battles you will ever see in a Vampire, and one of the highest performance kills you will ever come across. This is as good as they do in game, and fully upgraded, it's not going to be a whole lot better. The aircraft itself is just so subpar on all its figures against what it has to fight for the tiering that it's got. This should really be given the same battle rank as something like the Yak-15. Then this aircraft will be competitive. Even with a flight model fix, the current performance model, which is underperforming, but as I said, with the actual thrust figures on the engine, it's not underperforming by a lot. It would still be competitive against something like the Yak-15. That's it. Anyway, let's go check out the results. Well, despite flying the Vampire, it turns out 2 AI and 2 ground kills are all you need to take first place on Korea. That's the first time I've ever seen first place flying this aircraft. I also got the Fighter, Bomber and Bulletproof awards. 49,882 Silver Lions. And finish it off with 2,572 mod research points. The best battle that I've ever had in a Vampire, and it's pretty hard to try and get anything better than that. The aircraft just cannot climb. Its manoeuvrability is great, but it doesn't have the energy retention to be able to use that manoeuvrability without stalling itself out. Its firepower is really good, but without being able to use the manoeuvrability, the firepower is useless. The only thing you can really do with this is either try to sneak around the back of the enemy base and vulture the enemy players as they come into land, or take it in, ground strafe as many targets as you possibly can, fully accepting that it's a very, very, very short order. Somebody is going to come in and shoot you down, and there's nothing you can do about it. Unfortunately, unlike things like the F3 Meteor, which get a fair go having to battle props, which this thing in its current state wouldn't be such a bad fight. As I said, Meteor F3, Yak-15 sort of a level, wouldn't be such a bad place for this plane to fly. Its current battle rating, it's basically the old level 18. This thing fights MiGs, it fights F9Fs, it very rarely sees props. And unfortunately, until the flight model is fixed and at least brought up to what its real capabilities were, and until its battle rating is tiered down so it fights things that it's actually capable of performing with, unfortunately for the moment it is a very pretty plane, one of the best looking jets in the game, but the only purpose to have it in your hangar is to say that you've got it and to spin it around and have a look at it from time to time. Anyways, ladies and gents, I hope you found this informative and enjoyed it. Click like if you do, subscribe if you want to see more. Fly smart, fly safe, and I'll catch you in the skies.